Metrication or metrification is conversion to the metric system of units of measurement. Worldwide, there has been a long process of independent conversions of countries from various local and traditional systems, beginning in France during the 1790s and spreading widely over the following 2 centuries, but the metric system has not been fully adopted in all countries and sectors. Overview: in 2006, 3 countries did not mainly use the metric system: the United States, Burma, and Liberia. Some countries, however, still use non-metric units for some purposes. In the United Kingdom, for example, metric is the official system for most regulated trading by weight or measure purposes, but miles, yards, and feet remain the official units for road signage. Euro, and use of imperial units is widespread. The imperial pint also remains a permitted unit for milk in returnable bottles and for draft beer and cider in British pubs. Some sources now identify Liberia as metric, and in Burma it was announced in 2013 that the country is preparing to adopt the metric system. Both Burma and Liberia are substantially metric countries, trading internationally in metric units. Visiting advocates of metrication have stated that they use metric units for many things internally, with exceptions such as old petrol pumps in Burma, calibrated in British Imperial Gallons. These and other countries have adopted metric measures to some degree through international trade and standardization. For example, Sierra Leone switched to selling fuel by the litre in May 2011. The United States mandated the acceptance of the metric system in 1866 for commercial and legal proceedings, without displacing their customary units. In 1971, the National Bureau of Standards completed a 3-year study of the impact of increasing worldwide metric use on the U.S. The study concluded with a report to Congress entitled A Metric America a Decision Whose Time Has Come. Since then, metric use has increased in the U.S., principally in the manufacturing and educational sectors. Public Law 93-380, enacted August 21, 1974, states that it is the policy of the U.S. to encourage educational agencies and institutions to prepare students to use the metric system of measurement with ease and facility as a part of the regular education program. On December 23, 1975, President Gerald Ford signed Public Law 94-168, the Metric Conversion Act of 1975. This act declares a national policy of coordinating the increasing use of the metric system in the U.S. It established a U.S. metric boards whose functions as of October 1, 1982 were transferred to the Department of Commerce, Office of Metric Programs, to coordinate the voluntary conversion to the metric system. A number of jurisdictions have laws mandating or permitting other systems of measurement in some or all contexts, such as the United Kingdom, which still uses many imperial measures, such as miles and yards for road sign distances, road speed limits in miles per hour, pints of beer, and inches for clothes. Most countries have adopted the metric system officially over a transitional period where both units are used for a set period of time. Some countries such as Guyana, for example, have officially adopted the metric system, but have had some trouble over time implementing it. Antigua and Barbuda, also officially metric, is moving toward total implementation of the metric system, but slower than expected. The government had announced that they have plans to convert their country to the metric system by the first quarter of 2015. Other Caribbean countries such as St. Lucia are officially metric but are still in the process toward full conversion. The European Union used the Units of Measure Directive to attempt to achieve a common system of weights and measures and to facilitate the European single market. Throughout the 1990s, the European Commission helped accelerate the process for member countries to complete their metric conversion processes. The United Kingdom secured permanent exemptions for the mile and yard in road markings, and for the pint of draft beer sold in pubs. In 2007, the European Commission also announced that it was to abandon the requirement for metric-only labelling on packaged goods, and to allow dual metric Euro imperial marking to continue indefinitely. Other countries using the imperial system completed official metrication during the second half of the 20th century or the first decade of the 21st century. The most recent to complete this process was the Republic of Ireland, which began metric conversion in the 1970s and completed it in early 2005. In January 2007, NASA decided to use metric units for all future Moon missions, in line with the practice of other space agencies. The United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada have some active opposition to metrication, particularly where updated weights and measures laws would make obsolete historic systems of measurement. Other countries, like France and Japan, that once had significant popular opposition to metrication now have complete acceptance of metrication. Before the metric system, the Roman Empire used the pass measure. This was divided into 12 unci. The libra was another measure that had wide effect on European weight and currency long after Roman times, for example lb, a pound. The measure came to vary greatly over time. Charlemagne was one of several rulers who launched reform programs of various kinds to standardize units for measure and currency in his empire, but there was no real general breakthrough. In medieval Europe, local laws on weights and measures were set by trade guilds on a city-by-city basis. For example, the ell or ell was a unit of length commonly used in Europe, but its length varied from 40.2 cm in one part of Germany to 70 cm in the Netherlands and 94.5 cm in Edinburgh. A survey of Switzerland in 1838 revealed that the foot had 37 different regional variations, the ell had 68, there were 83 different measures for dry grain, 70 measures for fluids and 63 different measures for dead weights. When Isaac Newton wrote Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica in 1687, he quoted his measurements in Parisian feet so readers could understand the size. Examples of efforts to have local intercity or national standards for measurements include the Scottish Law of 1641, and the British Standard Imperial System of 1824, which is still commonly used in the United Kingdom. At one time Imperial China had successfully standardized units for volume throughout its territory, but by 1936 official investigations uncovered 53 dimensions for the chi varying from 200 mm to 1250 mm. 32 dimensions of the cheng, between 500 ml and 8 liters. And 36 different tsin ranging from 300 grams to 2500 grams. However, revolutionary France was to produce the definitive international system of units which has come to be used by most of the world today. The desire for a single international system of measurement came from growing international trade and the need to apply common standards to goods. For a company to buy a product produced in another country, they need to ensure that the product would arrive as described. The medieval ell was abandoned in part because its value could not be standardized. One primary advantage of the international system of units is simply that it is international, and the pressure on countries to conform to it grew as it became increasingly an international standard. However, it also simplified the teaching and learning of measurement as all SI units are based on a handful of base units, using decimal prefixes to cover all magnitudes. This contrasts with pre-metric units, which largely have names that do not relate directly to one another and are related to one another by inconsistent ratios which must simply be memorized. As the values in an SI expression are always decimal and mixed units are not used with SI, measurements are easy to add or multiply. Moreover, scientific measurement and calculation are greatly simplified as the units for electricity, force etc. are part of the SI system and hence are all interrelated in a coherent manner. Standardization of measures has contributed significantly to the Industrial Revolution and technological development in general. SI is not the only example of international standardization. Several powerful international standardization organizations exist for various industries, such as the International Organization for Standardization, the International Electrotechnical Commission, and the International Telecommunication Union. Forerunners of the metric system, decimal numbers are an essential part of the metric system, with only one base unit and multiples created on the decimal base, figures remain the same. This simplifies calculations. Although the Indians used decimal numbers for mathematical computations, it was Simon Stevin who in 1585 first advocated the use of decimal numbers for everyday purposes in his booklet at the end. He also declared that it would only be a matter of time before decimal numbers were used for currencies and measurements. His notation for decimal fractions was clumsy, but this was overcome with the introduction of the decimal point, generally attributed to Bartholomaeus Pitiscus, who used this notation in his trigonometrical tables. In his essay Towards a Real Character and a Philosophical Language, published in 1668, John Wilkins proposed a system of measurement that was very similar in concept to today's metric system. He proposed retaining the second as the basic unit of time and proposed that the length of a pendulum which crossed the zero position once a second should be the base unit of length. This length, for which he proposed the name standard, would have been 994 millimeters. His base unit of mass, which he proposed calling 100, would have been the mass of a cubic standard of distilled rainwater. The names that he proposed for decimal multiples and subunits of his base units of measure were the names of units of measure that were in use at the time. In 1670, Gabriel Mouton published a proposal that was in essence similar to Wilkins' proposal, except that his base unit of length would have been 1/1000th of a minute of arc of geographical latitude. He proposed calling this unit the virgo. Rather than using different names for each unit of length, he proposed a series of names that had prefixes, rather like the prefixes found in SI. In 1790, Thomas Jefferson submitted a report to the United States Congress in which he proposed the adoption of a decimal system of coinage and of weights and measures. He proposed calling his base unit of length a foot, which he suggested should be either 3/10 or 1/3 of the length of a pendulum that had a period of 1 second, that is 3/10 or 1/3 of the standard proposed by Wilkins over a century previously. This would have equated to 11.755 English inches or 13.06 English inches. Like Wilkins, the names that he proposed for multiples and subunits of his base units of measure were the names of units of measure that were in use at the time. The great interest in geodesy during this era, and the measurement system ideas that developed, influenced how the continental U.S. was surveyed and parceled. The story of how Jefferson's full vision for the new measurement system came close to displacing the Gunter chain and the traditional acre, but ended up not doing so, is explored in Andrew Linklater's Measuring America. Conversion process. The metric system was officially introduced in France in December 1799. In the 19th century, the metric system was adopted by almost all European countries: Portugal, Netherlands, Belgium and Luxembourg, Switzerland, Spain, Italy, Germany, and Austria-Hungary. Thailand did not formally adopt the metric system until 1923, but the Royal Thai Survey Department used it for cadastral survey as early as 1896. Denmark and Iceland adopted the metric system in 1907. Chronology and status of conversion by country . Links in the country point to articles about metrication in that country. Notes. There are 3 common ways that nations convert from traditional measurement systems to the metric system. The first is the quick, or Big Bang route, which was used by India in the 1960s and several other nations including Australia and New Zealand since then. The second way is to phase in units over time and progressively outlaw traditional units. This method, favored by some industrial nations, is slower and generally less complete. The third way is to redefine traditional units in metric terms. This has been used successfully where traditional units were ill-defined and had regional variations. The Big Bang way is to simultaneously outlaw the use of pre-metric measurement, metricate, reissue all government publications and laws, and change education systems to metric. India's changeover lasted from April 1, 1960, when metric measurements became legal, to April 1, 1962, when all other systems were banned. The Indian model was extremely successful and was copied over much of the developing world. The phase-in way is to pass a law permitting the use of metric units in parallel with traditional ones, followed by education of metric units, then progressively ban the use of the older measures. This has generally been a slow route to metric. The British Empire permitted the use of metric measures in 1873, but the changeover was not completed in most Commonwealth countries until the 1970s and 1980s when governments took an active role in metric conversion. Japan also followed this route and did not complete the changeover for 70 years. In the United Kingdom, the process is still incomplete. By law, loose goods sold with reference to units of quantity have to be weighed and sold using the metric system. In 2001, the EU Directive 80/EC stated that supplementary units would become illegal from the beginning of 2010. In September 2007, a consultation process was started which resulted in the directive being modified to permit supplementary units to be used indefinitely. The third method is to redefine traditional units in terms of metric values. These redefined quasi-metric units often stay in use long after metrication is said to have been completed. Resistance to metrication in post-revolutionary France convinced Napoleon to revert to mesures usuels, and, to some extent, the names remain throughout Europe. In 1814, Portugal adopted the metric system, but with the names of the units substituted by Portuguese traditional ones. In this system, the basic units were the mar pound o travessa equals 1 decimeter equals 1 meter, the Canada equals 1 liter and the Libra equals 1 kilogram. In the Netherlands, 500 g is informally referred to as a pond and 100 g as an ons, and in Germany and France, 500 g is informally referred to respectively as een pond and een livre. In Denmark, the redefined pund is occasionally used, particularly among older people and fruit growers, since these were originally paid according to the number of pounds of fruit produced. In Sweden and Norway, a mil is informally equal to 10 kilometers, and this has continued to be the predominantly used unit in conversation when referring to geographical distances. In the 19th century, Switzerland had a non-metric system completely based on metric terms equals 30 centimeters, 1 zoll equals 3 centimeters, 1 linni equals 3 millimeters. In China, the jin now has a value of 500 g and the liang is 50 g. It is difficult to judge the degree to which ordinary people change to using metric in their daily lives. In countries that have recently changed, older segments of the population tend to still use the older units. Also, local variations abound in which units are round metric quantities or not. In Canada, for example, ovens and cooking temperatures are usually measured in degrees Fahrenheit and Celsius. Except for in cases of import items, all recipes and packaging include both Celsius and Fahrenheit, so Canadians are typically comfortable with both systems of measurement. This extends to manufacturing, where companies are able to use both imperial and metric units, since the major export market is the US, but metric is required for both domestic use and for nearly all other export. This may be due to the overwhelming influence of the neighboring United States. Similarly, many English Canadians still often use non-metric measurements in day-to-day discussions of height and weight, and for clothing sizes, which are invariably measured in inches, though most driver's licenses and other official government documents record weight and height only in metric. In Canadian schools, however, metric is the standard, except when it comes up in recipes, where both are included, or in practical lessons involving measuring wood or other materials for manufacturing. In the United Kingdom, degrees Fahrenheit are seldom encountered, while other metric units are often used in conjunction with older measurements, and road signs use miles rather than kilometers. Another example is hard and soft metric. Canada converted liquid dairy products to liter, 500 milliliters, and 250 milliliters sizes, which caused some complaining at the time of the conversion, as a liter of milk is slightly over 35 imperial fluid ounces, while the former imperial quart used in Canada was 40 ounces. This is an example of a hard metric conversion. Conversely, butter in Canada is sold primarily in a 454 g package, which converts to 1 imperial pound. This is considered a soft metric conversion. Such countries could be said to be semi-metric. However, unlike in the rest of Canada, metrication in the francophone province of Quebec has been more implemented and metric measures are more consistently used in Quebec than elsewhere in Canada. Exceptions: as of 2015, In most countries of the world, the metric system officially dominates. Traditional units, however, are still used in many places and industries. For example, automobile tire pressure is measured as SI in countries such as Brazil, Peru, Argentina, Australia, and Chile, which are otherwise completely metric. Automotive engine power is usually measured in horsepower in Russia, most other ex-USSR countries and German-speaking countries, although in the EU from 2010 the horsepower is permitted only as a supplementary unit. In Hong Kong, traditional Chinese and British imperial units are normally used instead of metric units in particular types of trade. Amongst construction workers in Northern Europe, planks and nails are often called by their old inch-based names. The length of small sailboats is often given in feet in popular conversation. Office space is often rented in traditional units, such as square feet in Hong Kong and India, tsubo in Japan, or pyeong in Korea. In plumbing, some pipes and pipe threads are still designated in inch sizes due to historic international acceptance of particular sequences of pipe sizes and pipe threads, such as BSP/ISO 7/EN 10226 threads. In the United Kingdom, Ireland, and some Commonwealth countries, temperatures of domestic gas ovens are often specified using gas marks. Automotive wheel diameters are still set as whole-inch measurements. Dots per inch and pixels per inch continue to be used in describing graphical resolution in the computer and printing industry. Television and monitor screen diagonals are still commonly cited in inches in many countries. However, in countries such as Australia, France and South Africa, centimeters are often used for television sets, whereas CRT computer monitors and all LCD monitors are measured in inches. Many large-format computer printers, commonly known as plotters, have carriage widths measured in inches. Common widths are 24 in, 36 in, 44 in and 60 in. While metric media sizes are often quoted, rolls of film, plain paper or photographic paper are normally sold in these widths, giving rise to wastage when they are trimmed. Rolls lengths are variously quoted in feet or meters. In the electronic industry, the dominant spacing for components is based on intervals of 1 to 10 in, and a change would lead to compatibility issues, for example, for connectors. Within the mechanical industry, inch-based spare parts can occasionally be kept, for example, to service American or pre-World War II machines, but at maintenance, screws may be exchanged to metric thread. In Ireland, the only legal exception to the metrication process was the pint in bars, pubs, and clubs, 500 milliliters, 750 milliliters, or 1L or 700 milliliters. In practice, metrication in Ireland is incomplete in other areas as well. In Australia, a pint of beer was redefined to 570 milliliters. In both metric and non-metric countries, racing bicycle frames are generally measured in centimeters, while mountain bicycle and other frames are measured in either or both. In Spain and former colonies that is Americas and Philippines, certain pre-metric units are still used, for example, the Kia ± a cubed N for land measurement in the Philippines, the Faneg or Farado and a Tahala to name 3 used in Spain and other former possessions. The pulgada is 23 mm, 2 mm shorter than the English inch. In many long-time metric countries, when non-metric units are used, it is often to give rough estimates in a short form, while accurate measures always are metric. For example, 6 feet may feel less exact and shorter to say than 1.8 meters, or 180 centimeters. Measurement tools for inches are generally rare to find there, only on the other side of some carpenters' rulers, and may present a variation between national legacy inches and British US inches, easily causing significant measurement errors if used. The Imperial Gallon is used as a unit of measure for fuel in Anguilla, Antigua and Barbuda, Burma, the Cayman Islands, Dominica, Grenada, Montserrat, St. Kitts and Nevis and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The U.S. gallon is used in the Bahamas, Belize, British Virgin Islands, Colombia, Dominican Republic, Ecuador, El Salvador, Guatemala, Haiti, Honduras, Liberia, Peru, Turks and Caicos Islands, and the USA, especially for pricing. In Latin America, as SI units are standard, liters are used as well, for example, often regarding fuel economy, and the Spanish word gala cubed N may occasionally refer to a portable fuel container, often 5 to 20 L. Road distances and speed limits are still displayed in miles and miles per hour respectively in the USA, UK, Burma, and various Caribbean nations. In some countries, the transition is still in progress. The Caribbean island nation of St. Lucia announced metrication programs in 2005 to be compatible with CARICOM. United Kingdom equals. In the United Kingdom, some of the population continue to resist metrication to varying degrees. The traditional imperial measures are preferred by a majority and continue to have widespread use in some applications. The metric system is used by most businesses, and is used for most trade transactions. Metric units must be used for certain trading activities, although imperial units may continue to be displayed in parallel. British law has enacted the provisions of European Union Directive 80/EEC, which catalogues the units of measure that may be used for economic, public health, public safety and administrative purposes. These units consist of the recommendations of the General Conference on Weights and Measures, supplemented by some additional units of measure that may be used for specified purposes. Metric units could be legally used for trading purposes for nearly a century before metrication efforts began in earnest. The government had been making preparations for the conversion of the imperial unit since the 1862 Select Committee on Weights and Measures recommended the conversion, and the Weights and Measures Act of 1864 and the Weights and Measures Act of 1896 legalized the metric system. In 1965, with lobbying from British industries and the prospects of joining the common market, the government set a 10-year target for full conversion, and created the Metrication Board in 1969. Metrication did occur in some areas during this time period, including the resurveying of Ordnance Survey maps in 1970, decimalization of the currency in 1971, and teaching the metric system in schools. No plans were made to make the use of the metric system compulsory, and the Metrication Board was abolished in 1980 following a change in government. The United Kingdom avoided having to comply with the 1989 European Units of Measurement Directive, which required all member states to make the metric system compulsory, by negotiating derogations, including for miles on road signs and for pints for draft beer, cider, and milk sales. In popular conversation, the stone unit is still used for body weight, and feet and inches are used to describe height. United States and Canada equals. Over time, the metric system has influenced the United States through international trade and standardization. The use of the metric system was made legal as a system of measurement in 1866, and the United States was a founding member of the International Bureau of Weights and Measures in 1875. The system was officially adopted by the federal government in 1975 for use in the military and government agencies, and as preferred system for trade and commerce. It has remained voluntary for federal and state road signage to use metric units, despite attempts in the 1990s to make it a requirement. A 1992 amendment to the Fair Packaging and Labeling Act, which took effect in 1994, required labels on federally regulated consumer commodities to include both metric and U.S. customary units. As of 2013, all but one U.S. state have passed laws permitting metric-only labels for the products they regulate. Likewise, Canada also legally allows for dual labeling of goods provided that the metric unit is listed first and that there is a distinction of whether a liquid measure is a U.S. or a Canadian unit. Today, the American public and much of the private business and industry still use U.S. customary units despite many years of informal or optional metrication. At least two states, Kentucky and California, have even moved towards demetrication of highway construction projects. Air and sea transportation equals, air and sea transportation commonly use the nautical mile. This is about 1 minute of arc of latitude along any meridian arc, and it is precisely defined as 1852 meters. It is not an SI unit. The prime unit of speed or velocity for maritime and air navigation remains the knot. The prime unit of measure for aviation is usually estimated based on air pressure values, and in many countries, it is still described in nominal feet, although many others employ nominal meters. The policies of the International Civil Aviation Organization relating to measurement are, there should be a single system of units throughout the world, the single system should be the SI, the use of the foot for altitude is a permitted variation. Consistent with ICAO policy, aviation has undergone a significant amount of metrication over the years. For example, runway lengths are usually given in meters. The United States metricated the data interchange format for temperature reports in 1996. Metrication is also gradually taking place in cargo weights and dimensions and in fuel volumes and weights. Accidents and incidents. Confusion over units during the process of metrication can sometimes lead to accidents. One of the most notable examples was during metrication in Canada. In 1983, an Air Canada Boeing 767, nicknamed the Gimli glider following the incident, ran out of fuel in mid-flight. The incident was caused, in a large part, by the confusion over the conversion between liters, kilograms, and pounds, resulting in the aircraft receiving 22,300 pounds of fuel instead of the required 22,300 kilograms. During the reconstruction of Ypres after World War I, British Army engineers drew up the plans for rebuilding a bombed house in feet. However, the Belgian builders interpreted the numbers in meters. As a result, the house had enormous doors and windows. It still exists today. While not strictly an example of national metrication, the use of two different systems was a contributing factor in the loss of the Mars Climate Orbiter in 1998. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration specified metric units in the contract. NASA and other organizations worked in metric units, but one subcontractor, Lockheed Martin, provided thruster performance data to the team in pound-for-seconds instead of Newton-seconds. The spacecraft was intended to orbit Mars at about 150 kilometers in altitude, but the incorrect data meant that it descended to about 57 kilometers. As a result, it burned up in the Martian atmosphere. On September 25, 2009, the British Department for Transport published a draft version of legislation to amend its road signs legislation for comment. Among the proposed changes was an amendment to existing legislation to make dual-unit height and width warning and restriction signs mandatory. This was justified in paragraph 53 of the impact analysis by the text. Based on records from Network Rail's incident logs since April 2008, approximately 10 to 12% of bridge strikes involved foreign lorries. This is disproportionately high in terms of the number of foreign lorries on the road network. This proposal was shelved with the change of government in 2010, though many bridges are now signed both ways. See also. References. External links, online metric conversion application.